Okay, thank you all for coming out tonight. We've had a closed session, so we've already had our calls to order. I just want to welcome everybody back to the start of the new school year. And hope everybody enjoys what goes on for the next year. The superintendent will let us know. So one thing I do want to mention, Chris Russo, our board secretary, is not here tonight. Mark Toscano, our board attorney, will be calling the votes during the meeting, so if you hear an unusual voice or a different voice, that's what's going on.
Good evening, everyone. Just want to again welcome you back to the start of the 2017-2018 school year. And I just wanted to share that today, in coordination with our WWPEA Volunteer Committee, the district launched an initiative called WWP Cares. We're asking our staff, our buildings, our teams, our grade levels in every building to be working in unison towards fundraising efforts for those affected by the hurricanes over the last 2 weeks. So we will be working with our volunteer committees to organize support. We're currently working to vet charities. We want to make sure that the monies go to those directly impacted and not to administrative costs. So we're working with our staff and our students to identify charities that they want to support. But we again are working to do this in unison as a district. Again, through the volunteer committee, which is again a component of our Superintendent's Advisory Council, that's a component of our WWPEA contract. So my thanks to the members of that committee and to all of our staff that will be working with their students on this initiative over the next couple of weeks, and looking forward to building on this initiative that we moved forward last year with the month of service last May in honor of our fallen friend, Steve Mayer. So again, we look forward to that work and to helping those in need, and are optimistic about the impact that West Windsor-Plainsboro can have towards those impacted. Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to the high school student representatives.
Hello. Welcome back, board. I'd just like to start out by saying thank you very much for inviting me back. I'd also like to say thanks to my principal, Dr. Dauber, and I'm sure I speak for myself and Alex, where we are both very excited to serve you guys on the Board of Education. Now, as for North Sports, we are very proud to say that both of our soccer teams beat South. The boys won 2-0, while the girls won 3-0. Meanwhile, even with the cancellation of the high school North football team, the homecoming game does not cease to exist. We will be playing Lawrence High School's junior varsity team on Friday, October 13th, followed by on Saturday the homecoming dance, which is set up by the student council. Additionally, the student council is very hard at work doing their wall decorations that annually go up in the hallway of high school North. Additionally, the fall drama is fully in swing. They are putting on Shakespeare's The Twelfth Night. Auditions have been held and casting is in progress. And finally, with all of West Windsor and Plainsboro, nearly a week into the session of the school year, students and faculty are finally getting warmed up to their rotations and all their new classes. And hopefully, as you can tell by my congestion, we're all getting very accustomed to our new sleep schedules.
Thank you.
Good evening, Board of Education members and meeting attendees. My name is Alex Vina. I am a junior, and I am the Student Council Board of Education representative from High School South. Though it's only been 5 days of school, the South Student Council has already gotten to work on the first events of the school year. Tonight was our first meeting where we discussed our plan to team up with the Red Cross Club and raise money for victims of Hurricane Harvey in Texas. Another big event we are working hard to plan is homecoming, which will take place the week of October 27th. The homecoming theme is Halloween, which each grade will use their assigned color to decorate their commons to compete for the title of 2017 Homecoming Champs. The homecoming football game will take place on Friday, October 27th, where the South Pirates will verse Pennsauken High School, and the homecoming dance will take place the next night, Saturday, October 28th. Lastly, the Student Council is planning the second annual Powder Puff football game, where roles are reversed and girls can sign up to compete in a football tournament, and boys will cheer on the sidelines. The proceeds from this event will help support the Student Council and their next events of the year. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. That brings us to the first opportunity for public comments. The board invites thoughts and reactions on agenda items and items of concern from members of our community who are present. Each participant is asked to give his or her name and address prior to making a statement, which will be limited to 3 minutes. All statements should be directed to the presiding officer, and the public comment period will be limited to 60 minutes.
Aisha Hamilton, 11 Hereford Drive, West Windsor. It's a little weird being on this side of the podium, but I am here speaking as a parent. I want to commend the board and Dr. Adderholt for the efforts in sort of trying to appeal the decisions relating to the high school north and south football team. It is tragic that we don't have a high school north varsity football team anymore, but I know that our legislature, the 14th and the 15th district, are working on bits of legislation that might help us down the line. But I wanted to encourage our board and Dr. Adderholt to please pursue the appeals process, do whatever we need to do so from every front, and that parents are very supportive of this. I know my kids don't play football, but to me it's important that kids who want to play get to play. And so if you've got high schoolers who want to play football, want to be in the marching band, want to be cheerleaders, this affects all of them. So thank you for your efforts, and know that we're out here supporting you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Peter Searick, 23 Bradford Lane, Plainsboro. First off, I like the new look, Dr. Adderholt. So, making this up a little bit. My only comments tonight are on the dual immersion. I have some quick issues. I saw the transportation. I think we should probably sort out. One thing is if the child goes to X school and then gets transported to Y school, what school does he go back from? So that can be a little confusing. The other thing I'm concerned with, I'm not being a smart, wise guy, just saying from a stress standpoint, it's going to take time to transport the kids. So where's that time going to be made up from? So it's going to be taken out of their lunch. Are they going to have additional time? It's going to be taken out of their recess. So I think we should really look at that. The time that the kids are getting transported over to the other school, they have to get that time somewhere. So if they're taking it at a lunch or a recess, I think that would be very healthy for the kids. Just my view on the presentation that was sent out. I don't think the presentation, just in my opinion, I don't think the presentation was meant to really educate. It's really a sales presentation. We're supposed to be a family, we're supposed to make informed decisions together, and the whole presentation was just a sales presentation because we only heard one point of view. I mean, Everton just supported that dual immersion was beneficial, and some of those references were also old. The references, it would also be nice, it would be great if we could get a link to those references so that we could go directly to those references so that we could easily look at them and also ensure that we're getting to the right reference that they're making a light. But I think if we're deciding on something like this and we want the public and taxpayers' inputs, I think that we have to have an informative presentation, not a sales presentation. And it should have different points of view. And then we should assess over those two or three different points of view and then make an educated decision. I still think it's right that we have just a sales presentation, one point of view. Obviously, all those points of view supported the dual immersion. and we didn't see anything. I find it hard to believe that there's no other different points of view on blue immersion. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, we'll close the public comment then. And I'll just correct something. I think Mr. Syracuse might have been a little misinformed. There is no transportation in the middle of the day. The child starts the day at the school and spends the day in that classroom. That becomes, the dual language immersion becomes the classroom for that child. So it's kindergarten, it's for the half day of kindergarten. When they move on to first grade, they become a student in that class. That becomes their first grade class. So there is no transfer back and forth. The presentation would come up. Yes, and that's what was said in the presentation. But
Just one additional comment with respect to Ms. Hamilton's comment. Just so everyone knows, we are working with Senator Turner and Assemblyman Benson. They're looking to submit concurrent resolutions in the House and the Assembly, in the Senate, to try to move forward a resolution to help support schools with more than one high school being able to co-op. In addition, between Mr. Mason, Dr. Dauber, Mr. Leffold, and myself, and Mr. Dalton, will be represented at the 5 regional meetings for legislation that we brought forward for the NGSIA. It's been approved by them for the ballot in December. So in the next 2 months, we're taking 2 different paths. Please know that this is bigger than football. Both the resolution that we're working on, we're going to be modifying to include other sports with the NGSIA, and the Turner-Benson bill, we're looking to be bigger than football as well, because there's other athletic programs in our community that are struggling with enrollment and numbers at both South and North. So we're taking a 2-pronged approach for multiple sports to try to support our students and the preservation of those sports in our community.
okay, thank you. That brings us to the committee reports. That's the only curriculum that that's the list.
Hi, the curriculum committee met on Tuesday, September 5th. We reviewed the draft of the final Performing Arts Program Review Action Plan and the implementation of the recommendations from that program review. Next, we reviewed the data submitted to the state of New Jersey for the 2016-17 school year on the teacher evaluation system, which showed that for teachers who received assignments of rating, 0% were rated ineffective, 0% were rated partially effective, 6% were rated effective, and 94% were rated highly effective. The committee next examined the implementation of the first year of the district's offering of a financial literacy course online. We also considered the revised and new curricula for over 50 courses. Only courses to be offered in the 2016-17 school year had curricula written over the summer by the teachers who will be teaching these courses. Many courses that were new last year also went a revision based upon the teachers' experiences having taught the courses last year for the first time. These curricula were written and revised by the teachers who teach these courses, and the curricula were placed on the district website last week. We also recommend approval for the following professional development opportunity, the following educational resources, and the following professional education services. One is to provide 2018 reading recovery professional development and technical support for reading recovery teachers at a cost of $9,900 plus travel, and to provide EdGen's mathematical education resources for grades 4 to 7 for the 2017-18 school year at a cost of $2,000, and to recommend approval for Campfire, New Jersey, to provide Common Kids character education program for second grade, and that's at a total cost not to exceed $5,000. We also recommend the approval of overnight field trips for the Grover Middle School choir students to Music in the Parks Festival at the University of Delaware and in Williamsburg, Virginia in May of 2018. And we recommend the approval of overnight field trips for the following high school and North student groups: Yearbook Committee to Washington, D.C. in October of this year, Mom United Nations to East Brunswick, and November this year, Model Congress to Washington, D.C. in November, Junior Statesman of America to Woodbridge in November, Model Congress to Yale University in December, Model United Nations to Boston in January, Washington, D.C. in February, and Ithaca in April. Junior Statesman of America to Washington, D.C. in February, and the FRC Robotics team to Mount Olive High School in March. The FTC Robotics team to University of Scranton in March. The FRC Robotics team to Utah University in March. Another Junior Statesman of America to Woodbridge in April. And the FTC and FRC Robotics team to St. Louis, Missouri in April 2018. High school North cheerleaders will also go to Orlando in February. And we'll next meet on October 11th.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, that brings us to administration. Can I have a motion on items 1 to 5, and we have a green addendum as part of that. Michelle and Isaac. Any questions on the administration items?
Mr. Chen? Yes. Ms. Hertz?
Yes.
Ms. Hutt?
Yes.
Ms. Juliana?
Yes.
Ms. Cruz?
Next, an extension. Staying on the green paper.
Mr. Y.C. Chen?
Yes.
Mr. Taylor Tom?
Yes.
Ms. Cage?
Yes.
Mr. Flores?
Yes.
All motions passed.
Okay, curriculum, can I have a motion on items 1 through 10, Y, Z, and Dana?
I'm not ready to vote on this curriculum items. We need to discuss them.
Well, I call for a discussion now. Once the motion is passed, I ask if there's any discussion.
Okay.
Is there any discussion?
Yes, I have some questions left.
Sure.
I'm wondering, what are the criteria that will be looked at in 1 year to decide whether the pilot program is a success or not?
You're talking about the dual language, right?
I'm talking about the dual language
Okay.
immersion pilot.
That's, okay.
Yes.
Carol, you're specifically asking, I just want to make sure I understand the question, what the criteria will be, whether it's a success or not.
Right, because if it's a pilot program, in the previous meetings, Mr. Smith said that it will be evaluated to see if it should continue or not, or be expanded. So what criteria will be used to decide that?
That is something that the curriculum committee has not developed in concert with the administration at this time. That is something that would be worked on once we know the program's moving forward. But as we're looking at a kindergarten program, first step will be, once we know that we have permission to move forward with the pilot from the board, we'll be working to identify the locations of the program. We'll be working then to identify staffing with the regular education side. So when I say regular education side, for those of you that weren't in the presentation, programs run in concert with a teacher of elementary instruction that works with students in English, and a teacher of elementary instruction that's also certified in the content area with respect to language. The content standards are all been implemented. So one thing we'd be looking at, and again, we're talking about kindergartners, so we're not looking at standardized assessments here, but through observation, teacher feedback, parent feedback, talking to students, we'd be looking to see that are we seeing the benefit that we'd be hoping for, and we have to define what that benefit is, and that's something that I'm not prepared to say what that would be at this point. We'd have to make some determinations about do we see the validity of moving the program forward to year 2, and year 2 then has an impact with respect to first grade classrooms as the program is currently being structured. Now you're talking about 2 classrooms, 1 teacher that's full day in content area in English, other full-day content area in subsequent language, whether it be Chinese or Spanish. Students would then be switching midday with respect to their instructional program, as Mr. Smith talked about the potential roller coaster schedule. But ultimately, we would, to go back to your question, Carol, we have to really work to develop what that criteria would be. Because the board will have to make some decisions regarding staffing, programmatic, purchasing of materials, transportation. As of right now, it's very difficult to anticipate the transportation costs, because until we determine through whether it's lottery or through just the number of students that want to participate in the program. So if we have 25 spots and only 25 apply, you're going to take 25 from across the district. If you have 25 spots and 100 apply, then ultimately you're going to have to do some form of lottery. Transportation then is going to be based upon where do you need to bring those students from. So, and then the residual cost with respect to staffing and the classroom impact will also be depending on which program, which school unit you select to have the full scope of program, and how many students participate from that school and how many come from other schools. But the potential impact is if 15, if you have, let's say you have 25 students in the program, 15 come from the program runs in Town Center, and 15 come from Dutch Neck, Blackhawk, Millstone, Hawk, ultimately, then 15 more students are going to Town Center, which then pushes 15 across the grade level. So then we have to look at class size impact to that grade level. So until we know who the students are going to be, some of those outcomes or some of those impacts are going to be difficult to know. But what we don't want to do is just put a quota system in place and say you're only going to have 5 in this school. Or what Princeton does right now is they say only students at one school can participate in this one program, and no one else across the district can participate. We don't want to do that. We want to open it up to all students, all families, to have the opportunity to select if it's the right fit for their child. And we do anticipate that for some students, it might not be the right fit. So we want to also leave room for change to happen for students that maybe our families think it is a good idea, and then ultimately say maybe it's not the right fit for that child. And there's going to be, to Mr. Sears earlier, the question about doing like a sales pitch versus more. There's going to have to be presentations done to parents to make determinations about whether they're interested in having their children participate with Q&As and opportunity to ask questions so they can make informed decisions. And we're talking about current 4-year-olds. So families of rising kindergartners would be the first pilot group.
I have another question. I'm just thinking, as you're talking about classrooms and teachers that will be needed in coming years, say in 2 or 3 years, if you have, I don't know, 50 kids being bused to Maurice Hopper Town Center, then do you have to take 50 kids who would go there and send them off to another school because you don't have room? You know, if you're using how many, 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 classrooms for the dual immersion program, then where do those kids go? You might have to send kids out who were originally going to that school if you have so many kids coming in.
Well, you're raising a good point, and it's one of the reasons why the selection of school matters in the program.
It makes me wonder if it wouldn't make a lot more sense and be a lot simpler to do a pilot in one school. If it works really well, then do the same thing in another elementary school, but just do away with all the busing, which gets to be difficult for families and kids who might be disoriented and lose friends. But if you just have it, if it's a huge success, then you can do it in every elementary school and have however many classrooms you need in that school. But then you also wouldn't have the problem of having so many kids come to a school that you have to then send kids out to other schools. So, but it would still be available to everyone.
The reason for 2 schools and the recommendation is for 2 languages. One school that works with Spanish, one school that works with Chinese. So there's an opportunity to get 2 languages started in the belief that there would be sufficient interest with respect to those 2 languages. Ultimately, student interest and parent interest, we're talking again about 4-year-olds, so we're talking about family interest in the program will yield whether or not we could put forward both parent workshops in only one language supported by enrollment. We would only run in one language. With respect to ultimate limiting time, that is something we'll clearly have to measure moving forward. What we believe based on based on the programs that we selected the two schools based on some projections, ultimately, that we do believe we can house the program with current staffing. Again, because of the way in which bubbles work with respect to students, if you're sitting with class averages of 22, that's one thing. If you're sitting with class averages of 28, now you're talking about the need to add a section, and the impact ultimately starts to become, sometimes it's a basic skills teacher who loses the classroom, sometimes it's reading recovery that loses the classroom, sometimes it's a world language teacher if they're fortunate enough. In most buildings, they do not have classrooms that can lose the classroom. But those staff still needs space to work. So as we look at growth in our district, we also have an opportunity to look at potential additions, and that should, I believe, factor into where we put some replacements and programs.
So you're thinking right now that you have one language in one school and one language in a second school?
If that's the current thinking, and if sufficient interest is there, ideally, like in a dream scenario, there's sufficient interest to run the program at every school in both languages. And then ultimately, you're not talking about transportation, you're not talking about busing, you're talking about running the program. In a startup scenario, you're looking most likely at a busing scenario. You're raising very fair questions, and it's something that we need to step in, and the only way we're going to find out the answers to some of this is if we go forward in the pilot. Now, it's not uncommon to bus students or programs across the district to have cost. We do this with our ESL program right now. We do this with some of our magnet special education programs. In years gone by, we did this with our bilingual language program that was done as a different form of ESL implementation. We used to bus 2 or 3 students for Japanese at Dutch Net. And we had a bilingual certified Japanese teacher, elementary certified, that was teaching a handful of students. And every elementary school at one point had a magnet language, and students were bused across town. Ultimately, the model shifted, and we have a high-intensity ESL program now, and so we do have a different model based on the number of students. But it's not uncommon at the time to have program shifts. At one point, ESL used to be a community based on room size considerations. It's currently at Rover, and that was a shift that happened. I can see in the future where that shifts back. Very honestly, we'll press for space at both of those schools. So it is something that we're going to have to look at in the totality. It's going to require both the curriculum committee and an A&F committee, through your respective committees, to be involved in those conversations and those decisions.
Okay. Michelle?
Yeah, Dave, I just wanted to ask a question. I thought I heard Carol make a comment, and I just want to have clarification on it. I think I heard Carol say that she was concerned about it. If a certain number of students are enrolled, you have a lot of kids coming into classes for dual language immersion, I'm just going to say Hawk. And it might create a crowding situation so that certain kids who are districted to Hawk might have to go somewhere else. Can you please tell me if that is possible?
Well, there's no current plan to do any kind of redistricting as a result of dual language immersion. And so that's not something that we contemplated at this point. I think it's important just to leave everything on the table. So I don't want to sit here and say that that's not something that we would have to look at in the future if the numbers, let's say, push 20 additional students to an elementary school. Could you look at the zoning or a neighborhood path and work with specific families to talk about do we have a shift? Again, that's not something we contemplated, but I don't want to sit here and say to the board that it wasn't something that we wouldn't have to look at. Again, we're talking multiple years down the road, but it's important to raise these questions in front of us.
Weiser?
Yeah, maybe just one point about the student, where they're coming from. We did have some discussion within the curriculum committee, Carol. So I think we don't want to have a situation where we offer the program, even during the pilot, only 1/4 of the population. We want to make sure it's fair and available to all the community members. Obviously, if their interest is bigger, then we have to have a lottery drawing. So that's the consideration. Not to say that your proposal wouldn't work. I mean, in terms of busing, of course, it worked. And in fact, Princeton kind of did that. We visited Princeton, they only designated 1 school, but there are other reasons for them to do that. So that's one piece. And the other piece, I think I want to maybe just talk to Peter's point about the presentation, which I unfortunately missed it. I have to watch the video and look at the PowerPoint. You are saying it's a sales pitch. To some extent, it is a pitch to the community to generate interest. At the same time, I did a lot of homework and research. I talked to several people across the country, some in California, some in North Carolina, and some in Utah. Those parents, community members, they have gone through this program, some a few years, some 10 years. So uniformly, I got a positive response, and I even tried to search the internet and try to find some negativity. It's really hard to find, to be honest. There are challenges on this program, for sure. Nutrition being one, and the teacher professional development being another. Imagine you have to teach some subject content in a target language, right? And how to switch over to English at some point in time. So there are challenges, but there are solutions also out there, because this is not an experiment. This is very well established across some part of the country. To my own judgment, it's a judgment call. I think this program should be widespread across the entire country. I think it will help our country's education level tremendously if we do that going forward. So, just 2 points. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, I have a question. Mark Smith mentioned when he presented this that sometime around 3rd grade, there's something happens with the children and then they seem to catch up a couple years later. And can you explain what that is? Because I don't understand it. And I'm sitting here saying, well, if your child doesn't do this, does that mean they just have this constant upward forward motion? And can anyone really catch up to that if someone's speeding ahead of them for a couple of years? So, and I've read that language has to come before reading and understanding math and science and all these other things in this language. So if the kids are being taught certain subjects in the target language when they don't really know the language, does that mean they will be behind in math or science or social studies or whatever it is they're being taught in the target language?
So we're very fortunate tonight that Sherry Sassmore, our world language supervisor, who was here with Martin Smith, please, just happens to be in the audience. Very excited for this program to be coming forward tonight. So Sherry raised her hand, so I'm going to defer to her expertise on this.
Thank you, Carol, for raising such good questions. I appreciate this. I think your first question regarded the potential 3rd grade dip. That happens. I know Martin mentioned that, and I remember kind of doing like this when he said that. That happens when it's a 90-10 model. 90-10 meaning 90% of the instruction is in the target language and 10% is in English. And what happens with those is that by 3rd grade, because 90% of their instruction is in the target language, sometimes there's a bit of a dip in 3rd grade. They've more than caught up by 5th grade. They're 7 months ahead. And by the end of 8th grade, they're almost a full academic year ahead in English language arts. They have now discovered, I just went to some PD on that this summer down in Delaware for 3 days. It doesn't happen in a 50-50. We're going to have a 50-50, where it's like 50% in the target language and 50% in English. So it's very rare for it to happen in that kind of, in the kind of model that we're having. And if I could just address your second question, I believe you said you were concerned about students having sufficient language to be able to understand the math and science. The reason we choose math and science and not social studies is because it's very, very concrete. And they don't actually have to understand everything. I just did a whole lesson with English-speaking supervisors and other administrators, principals in our district. I did the entire science lesson in Chinese on density, and they all got it. And if they can do it, trust me, kindergartners can do it. So you actually don't have to understand. I didn't mean that the way it came out. Adults don't pick it up as quickly as children do, is what I was trying to say. Please take that the way it was meant. Can we sit down now? So they actually can understand, and they score right level on standardized tests. And kindergartners obviously aren't taking standardized tests, but they score right level with their monolingual peers, their peers in monolingual classrooms in in the math and in the sciences. You know, we don't do social studies because it's not concrete. You need the language to be able to understand the more esoteric parts of social studies while you do math and science. It's very, very concrete. And you asked me about how we would check the program in order for the real benefits to start showing up, like the fact that you're 7 months ahead in 5th grade. It takes a few years for that to come through. But at the end of kindergarten, we should be able to see, are the kids meeting the standards? Are the kids becoming more proficient in the language? And I'm working more and more closely with some very well-established programs in Utah and Delaware. Princeton just started one. I'm also working with Princeton, but they're a little newer, on what the benchmarks are and how do we know. As Dr. Animal said, we haven't ironed all that out specifically. That's still yet to come. But we are working with that, and there will be benchmarks that we will want to make. One of our top goals for this program is that the kids meet the same academic standards. They meet the same academic standards, and they meet target language proficiency. That's our top goals, or two of our top goals. Did I? No, thank you. Okay. And I didn't mean that about the administrator.
Well, we believe you.
Anyone else?
Oh, yeah, I'll say something. Yeah, I was going to say something. So I'm terrible at foreign languages. I know one language, English. And it's fascinating to look at my kids, because I've been thinking about it, and I talked to my kids about it. So I have 2 kids that went through the district. One of them who took Spanish in 2nd grade and embraced it, and one of them who took Spanish in 2nd grade and kind of rejected it. And the early learning is hugely different, because my daughter's attitude and ability to learn languages is fascinating. And the way she talks about, so she did Spanish through high school. She did an immersion program in Chinese. Her current boyfriend speaks some completely different language, and she was explaining to me how the structure is different, and it's just fine, you just have to get it. And then she's trying to learn Japanese for a trip. And it's fascinating to see that when you embrace another language at a young age, you really can, I think, change the way your brain thinks about languages. So I think it's a great idea.
Anyone else? Vote?
This hurts.
I'm sorry,
this is curriculum items 1 through 10.
I am ready to vote on item 1. I'm not ready to vote on the rest of it.
You want to discuss?
You want to vote on the one with one and discuss the other one? Sure.
Well, we have the whole motion. Let's go through the whole agenda, and so if you have any other questions.
Motion, just to point on it, there's a motion on the floor that was brought second was for curriculum 1 through 10.
Right. So if you have any other questions on the curriculum agenda.
Okay, I have a lot of questions on the curriculum.
Okay.
I read all of the curriculum changes and all of the old curriculums that were being changed and compared them. And it was a very interesting process. I learned a lot, and there were a couple of surprises. One is that I want to ask Dr. Adwold and Mr. Dalton, what is the process for curriculum changes? In other words, are teachers doing this? Are supervisors doing it? Are assistant superintendents doing it? And who reviews them all? And how does that work?
So recommendations come forward from the department supervisors in concert and working with their teachers, the department meetings. They then work with Mr. Smith in the spring, really through the budget season, to identify the dollars and everything necessary to fulfill the curriculum requirement. Ultimately, the board then, the curriculum committee makes a determination on the number of curriculum projects and then we move forward. We post core curriculum writing. All the programs all the curriculums are written by our teachers and teach that content, or have taught that content to hold certifications. Yes, they do it with oversight from our administration with a template that's a district format, but ultimately it's the teachers that are teaching those classes that write the curriculum, submit the curriculums. Feedback is given from the supervisors to the staff members that are writing those curriculums. Ultimately, it's submitted to the assistant superintendent, who then reviews the curriculum, provides feedback if there's necessary feedback to be given. We work to make sure that all the All the curriculums is really to work with content supervisors to make sure that they're written to the standards of the appropriate subject areas. Ultimately, it comes from the hands of the staff that are writing the curriculum and administrative feedback and oversight. And then it's brought forward to the curriculum committee. In this case, the curriculum committee met on September 5th. It was posted on the board workspace on September 2nd. Went to the curriculum committee, and that was for all 9 board members to have access to. Went to the curriculum committee on September 5th. It was posted to the public on Friday, September 9th. Not 8th, excuse me. And then here we are this evening, bringing forward a recommendation for the curriculum to go forward.
Just to add on to that explanation, can you explain why would you would need to change the curriculum? So I guess through an example or just understanding what are we looking at when we're changing the curriculum?
Well, sometimes it's as simple as the standards themselves or that content area have changed. So for instance, in science, the next gen science standards have come into place. We have a responsibility to have our curriculum in alignment with the next gen science standards. So all 6 flow science curriculums were realigned with the next gen science standards. The teachers then work to revise them based on the years of experiences, working with the teaching resources, working with each other, aligning to the new standards. And then one of the things that we made sure is that there was specific emphasis of engineering and modeling connections that were required in all science curriculums as a result of the next gen science standards. So that would be an example where due to a standards change, which was driven through national effort and required by the state of New Jersey, all of our curriculum documents K-12 over the last 2 years have had to be revised for science. Does that answer?
Yeah. Okay, I want to say bravo to the orchestra teachers who wrote these curriculums. They're very clear and sounds like a great program. One thing I noticed in a lot of these is that there are punctuation marks missing. So I'm wondering if someone is going, I went through and found literally hundreds of punctuation marks that are missing. So I'm wondering if someone's going to fix that before these become official documents. Anyway, so there are a lot of missing periods, but otherwise, these are great. And the funny thing was that surprisingly, the science teachers all had perfect punctuation, and the English curriculums had very bad punctuation. So I don't know what that means. One thing that is missing from the new curriculum for 7th grade orchestra is rapid string crossings with separate bows. So I did not find that in the 8th grade curriculum, so I'm wondering why they took that out. I have a question. In middle school orchestra, how many days a week do they have a group lesson, and how many days a week do they meet as an ensemble? For band and orchestra, you know?
My understanding is the majority of the middle school principal.
Every other, it's AV day. AV day, every other. And then ensemble, usually during, they meet every other day on an AV day schedule, and then ensembles are scheduled on a rotating basis. I forget how many days, so I'd have to go back and look at that.
So once a week?
Yeah. Because it's a very large group in our middle schools. It's a very large group in those ensembles.
Right. Right. Okay, grade 5 band. It says that these are kids who have just picked up an instrument for the very first time. It says under unit essential questions, how do performers select repertoire and interpret musical works? And how does understanding the structure and context of musical works inform performance? Now, when you're a kid who just learned how to put the 3 pieces of the flute together, I don't think repertoire is your biggest concern. So I'm just wondering why it's appropriate to have this in the 5th grade band. And then down under where it says, when performing, students will know and be able to demonstrate an understanding of how skill level and musical maturity help to determine appropriate repertoire selection. I just think that's out of place and this is probably for a higher grade. Let's see. Okay, then in the fifth grade band, in the old curriculum, they learned Ramada and repeat signs. That's not in the new curriculum. I'm wondering why that was taken out. And there's a whole section on all of these band curriculums in the old curriculum where you have ear training. Basic solfege, tuning notes, identifications, performance of melodic intervals, unison, and octave, and intonation. And intonation is really important in music, as we all know, so I don't know why these were taken out. Naming the notes in and on the staff and playing range, chant and play easy rhythm patterns in duple meter. These are the things that were taken out. Also, being able to demonstrate an understanding of which ones to rest. I mean, that seems pretty basic. I don't know why that's different. Grade 6 band, let's see, same thing, they took out the ear training. It says in the introduction that there will be ear training, but during summary and rationale for the whole thing, it says at the bottom, building, continuation of building technique, ear training, and exploration of musical expression. But then when you look at the list of what the students will learn, there's no ear training. Do you have any idea why we take out ear training again?
So what I can tell you about art, music, and theater documents is that all the documents this summer were both aligned to both the new national standards, the concepts of creating, presenting, responding, connecting, development, and society. And they all are working with this. Mr. Santoro, or Platinum Arts, sits on the state committee, president of the Music Foundation, and he's well aware of the new standards in New Jersey that are coming forward. He sits on that committee. So we were working to ensure that we're aligned with the draft new standards that are coming forward. So we're moving out our documents not only aligned with the national, but then we revised with the new content standards. So when they write curriculum, they're writing to a national standard. And again, these are coming from our district staff. So like when we're talking about the 4th and 5th grade instrumental music curriculum, we're talking about 5 teachers that teach that grade level, wrote that curriculum, using the new standards, and working in concert with Mr. DePasso. They wrote the curriculums and made determinations based on what they felt best for adopting and aligning standards. If they make a recommendation for your training to come out, that does not mean they're not going to focus on it, it just means it might not be the standards with respect to the curriculum document that they're writing. So again, every curriculum that's in front of you literally, it is our teachers for this district, certified in this area, that work with documents.
Yes, I understand that. They also wrote the previous document, and so I'm just wondering what their thinking was about why they took that out of the top. But you're saying they probably will do the ear training, but it's just not written in the curriculum?
I'm married to a music teacher. It's impossible to teach music without following that training.
Same thing with grade 7 even. The AP Computer Science, on page 3, there is something highlighted in yellow, which is not a word. Under unit enduring understanding, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th line down, it says TIONS for society. So that should be fixed. On page 6, under summary and rationale, there's a missing word on the first line. It says, when used correctly, computational technologies can prove to be extremely powerful. It should be can prove to be extremely powerful. page 9, under students will be able to, it says express and algorithm in language. I think that's supposed to be express and algorithm in language. On page 15, same thing. And same thing on page 20. On page 34, under summary and rationale, the last line, it says, but the work submitted should be individual students' homework. Should be the individual's homework. On page 39, under students will be able to, it's the express and algorithm again. Okay, grade 6, English, IRL. I wonder, Dr. Adler, if you could explain. It says reading workshop is designed to teach students to seek out books according to their interests. And what I'm wondering is, if you have a kid who only likes to read comic books, or only likes to read science fiction, or whatever it might be, how are you going to expand their appreciation of the wealth of books there are to read in different areas if you don't give them something that's not necessarily comes to their mind as what they like to read?
Mrs. Hurt, I'll take that. I think when you look at that in that context, but typically they're within a unit of study of various genres. So if they're in unit of study, for instance, in historical fiction, it's a book that the child chooses around historical fiction. So yes, your question is valid. We don't want them reading just one area, but typically in workshop work, it's around a unit of study. So it could be historical fiction, it could be memoir, it could be a whole variety of things. The child chooses, but within that area.
Okay, so the teacher gives them a choice of books to choose from.
Absolutely. So instead of every child, having to read the same book, here's a selection of books on that topic.
Okay.
We can all still get the learning of memoir from a whole variety of books, but ones that personally I connect with, and that are at my appropriate reading level that you challenge me.
Okay. It also says under suggested objectives, it says the students will be able to, and down at the bottom it says, assess peers' abilities to communicate effectively in discussions. Do you really have sixth graders assessing each other's communication skills? I mean, that seems
Sure. When they're working in book groups, they do provide each other with feedback. Absolutely.
about the discussion?
Absolutely. Yeah. There are structures that the children learn from the teachers on how to provide feedback to each other in appropriate ways, friendly ways, especially when they're reflecting on their reading. So they may be sitting in a small group and they would be discussing, how they connected to something that they read within a book, and students would, usually the feedback is supportive feedback to say to them, I understand your point on that, but have you also considered this? And we teach, there's a whole variety of structures, but they're taught all the way down to elementary school on how to give productive feedback.
There's some punctuation problems under in Unit 2, under suggested objectives. Thinking in response to new details, and this quotation that shouldn't be there. And the next line should have a period at the end and not a comma. There are a lot of missing periods throughout this thing. It's really funny, all the science curriculums have all the punctuation exactly right, but the English ones have all sorts of punctuation problems. Okay, it says in here, this is the new curriculum for 6th grade IRLA. Vocabulary acquisition and use. Determine or clarify the meaning of unknown and multiple meaning words and phrases based on grade 6 reading and context. Use context, use common grade appropriate Greek or Latin affixes, resources. Consult reference materials such as dictionaries, glossaries, and thesauruses. There's an impression among a lot of parents that vocabulary is not being focused on enough, or because the worldly wise and the vocabulary books are no longer allowed in classrooms, that their kids are not learning enough vocabulary throughout, fifth grade through 12th grade.
Well, the research has shown over the years that learning vocabulary for the sake of learning vocabulary in that context, almost similar to what we're talking about in the world language program, the dual immersion program, is, it's important that that language acquisition occur within the content, within the reading. And what we did when I was in school, and even when I taught, just learning vocabulary for the sake of vocabulary, not actually using it, is a practice that we've really steered away from in education for probably at least 15 to 20 years now. That's why we're using a variety of reading materials instead of just one text in a classroom and things like that to learn which words we can continue to introduce to students through the variety of text, and that's why we're always looking at adding more and more text to our classroom and raising the reading levels of the students through the text.
I just wanted to point out that the SAT was redesigned a couple of years ago, and the vocabulary section was removed because I believe that it was felt that that is not a way to assess knowledge of the students, and that now the SAT verbal section has students reading sections and commenting and making, answering questions based on the text. So that the SAT doesn't even use those books anymore.
I wouldn't put any stock into what the SAT is doing, knowing who the president of that organization is and what he's done to the whole place. So I wouldn't use that for evidence of anything. I mean, when you have a wordly wise book or you have a word vocabulary book, you not only learn the definition and the spelling, but then you use it in a sentence, presumably, and the papers you write. I'm not sure.
Again, but that's just in a sentence you write. We're trying to take it and expand it to a deeper level of the work. So I learn new vocabulary through the new materials I'm learning, and then I use it in conversation, because the language arts standards aren't just about learning words. It's about listening, speaking, reading, and writing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's how do we have conversations around those words? It's how do we develop vocabulary lists based on what we see our students need to learn, based on grade level, based on other areas of content. So how can they make relationships to those words, not just learning words in isolation just for the sake of learning words?
Well, do they have the vocabulary quizzes or no?
My son's in high school and he has vocabulary quizzes.
Yeah, I'll second that. My son is in high school and has vocabulary. He also learns it in context. When you read the books and they actually pull out words and they talk about the words in context of the reading that they're doing. I can actually show you an example.
Okay, in the 6th grade IRLA, they're spending 5 days of time on practicing for the standardized test. That seems like a waste of time. Especially since when we get a new governor, the part test will probably be gone. Let's see what unit this is. Literacy skills for standardized testing situations. On the instructional focus at the bottom, there are 2 things that contradict each other. It says standardized tests of reading and writing represent a particular genre of reading and writing, significantly different from your daily reading and writing practice and workshop. The next thing it says is, or the last one, standardized test question formats differ significantly from classroom question formats. And so those 2 things contradict each other. Doesn't make any sense. Let's see. In the grade 7, it looks like they took poetry out and moved it to grade 8. The leveled book. Can you explain that? What is a leveled book?
Right, so kind of what we referenced before, students reading books on their level or slightly above their level to challenge them. There's a book rating system on how books are leveled. Within a grade span, students should be starting the school year at a certain level, let's say level K, but the hope would be that by mid-year they're at level L or level M, and the teachers assess that so that you're always raising their level of reading. Those books are leveled by vocabulary, level of difficulty of reading, and it's a national leveling system. All of our teachers a few years ago were all trained in the same system of leveling, so that they all use that same type of system. So to get children into those more challenging books, you're always looking at where do they leave off, and where can I move them to the next level and encourage them in their reading to introduce them to more vocabulary, introduce them to more complex topics, introduce them to longer texts and deeper level texts.
Grade 8. It looks like they left off the top a unit about writing through research and investigative journalism. I don't know why they did that. Page 2, there's bottom of the first paragraph, it says, the memoir should be approached now as only the narrative genre or the opinion argument genre, but a hybrid of the two. I think now should be not. I think that letter is wrong. And then we have this unit, an LGBTQ pilot. It says to be taught either at the start of the year or at the conclusion. Why shouldn't it be in the middle? I mean, couldn't it be at any point?
It probably relates to the units of study. So some of the units of study, especially the middle school, align to other curricular areas. So for instance, maybe a unit in social studies. So because of the order of some of those units, you want to stay in a certain alignment.
I see. Okay. Okay. Then it says, grade 8. It says on page 9, students will be asked to decide how a compare and contrast essay might be the same and different from the work they have done. Students will be asked to use what they have learned this year and past years to draft an essay in which they compare and contrast the themes of two texts. The reason this jumped out at me is that I recently had a conversation with a professor at NYU who said he has freshman kids in one of his courses from WWP. And these are top students. NYU is an excellent school. He knows they're super achievers, and they cannot write. They cannot do the intellectual work of taking two ideas and putting them together in an essay, discussing them and comparing and contrasting them. So I guess that English teachers need to think about working more on that possibly. Then on page 10, it says, write a comparative essay and then addressed in SGO. What is an SGO?
Student growth objective.
And what does that mean? What is that used for? Or how does that work?
Under Achieve NJ, every teacher is required to have a student growth objective as a component of their evaluation. So, I'm sorry, you can tell me what the exact sentence is.
It just says, in quotes, this will be adjusted later in the year or next year. That's all. So I just didn't know what SGO was. Okay, so it's for teachers' evaluation.
It's an arbitrary measure assigned by the Department of Education as a means to try to penalize teachers that were all fundamentally objective.
Okay.
But I will add that our teachers have tried their best to find useful ways. So they're doing assignments that they feel they can score and get feedback about how their students have progressed. So what they do is try to design activities where they can teach their children, they can assess how they've grown in something, and at least learn from it as we do report out to the state. So they try to make them in their work as useful as they possibly can.
That's the more politically correct answer.
Okay. Okay. Then on page 21, I have a couple questions. The third line, it says, the second line, it says flash draft arguments. What does flash draft mean?
I'm not exactly sure. It's sounding to me like it's a writing prompt that,
Quick hit
a quick hit writing prompt. In other words, that something that you have to prepare for on the spot, like right on the spot without a lot of time for preparation.
Okay.
In the past, we had another term from them. It was an on-demand writing piece. Kind of like when you have to do some of the things for college entrance exams and things where you have to write on the topic you've never written on before.
Right, okay. Then it says angle evidence to support specific points. What does it mean to angle evidence?
I think that's having your evidence statements that support your opinion or your fact, what your pattern is that you're trying to address.
I think angle is probably not the right vocabulary word, but that's fine. At the bottom under resources, it has a list of things, video games, violence in video games, and so on. And at the beginning of this unit, it talks about child soldiers, genocide, injustice, and tragedies and violence. So I'm wondering why the resources are about video games. I think that's a mistake. Okay. There's also a missing word in on page 26. Identify the qualities of good writing expression in classroom writing. All right, this is Language Arts 1 College Prep. Let's see. What is the Collins writing system? What is that? It refers to it several times. Collins type 2, 3, 4, 5. Collins type 3 and 4. Do you know that?
It's not something I'm versed in.
Okay. Great. Okay, now Language Arts 2 Honors. This I compared with the old version of this, and my conclusion was that it seems like it's kind of watered down and become generic, and it's missing a lot of authors. For instance, in the old curriculum, under Unit Enduring Understandings, which is at the beginning of every unit, it talks about this. And they talk about Greek mores and folkways, the heroes, ancient Greeks believe in tragic flaws. And then they talk about what is a family. Students will study the complex nature of family relationships as they're represented in authors. Seems like a good topic for a high school English class. Then they talk about who am I and where am I going, and explore stories and poems about self-realization, self-determination, and independence. These seem like really interesting things for high school kids to learn about. But in the new curriculum, they don't talk about any of that. It's all this generic, we will learn about characters, we will learn to write and speak clearly, we will, they've taken out all those things. So I'm wondering why those were taken out. And there are a lot of authors who are not in the new curriculum. Language Arts 2 Honors. The theater experience, going to school plays or to, I guess, McCarter, are the kids paying for this themselves, or do they get free tickets, or how does that work? Okay.
The students do pay.
They do.
But there are supplemental funds for students that cannot afford to go. If the teacher is aware of the circumstances. Also, through the same money, they're having it that come to high school staff. For 2 weeks, I think, for 3 weeks. And that is to help keep the costs down so that more students can go.
Great. Great.
For the good of the audience, Andrew being supervisor of mathematics as well.
Okay, and the embedded unit, developing language skills, it says course and grade level, language 1, language arts 1 honors, but this is language 2. So it's just a typo, I guess. Okay, in the, these are my page numbers, so this is the, I guess, last unit. Under students will be able to, it says recognizing and identifying. It should say recognize and identify. Again, I'm a little surprised this is from English teachers. So the old one had things like The Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane, poetry of Edgar Allan Poe, excerpts from Civil War journals, Frederick Douglass, and a couple other things which are not in the new curriculum. So I was just wondering why they took those out. It also had poetry of Sylvia Plath, Eudora Welty, Robert Frost, and others, which, and speeches by Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, or JFK, In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. Those are not in the new curriculum. Okay, now we're up to Algebra 2 Honors. On page 20, it says, under objectives, students will be able to, it says, utilize variation to model real-world situations and use it to make predictions. Then 2 lines down, it says the exact same thing, so that's just redundant. Okay. On the last page, 24, it says students will be able to identify the differences between and observational study. It should be and observational study. Okay, let's see. And the thing that's missing from the old curriculum is sketch graph of a function by applying symmetry, sketch graphs of a function by applying various translations, form functions from a verbal description, and when appropriate, determine the max and min value of a function. That's not in the new curriculum. I'm just wondering why. It seems pretty basic. Okay, this is grade 8 math. Missing from the old curriculum is cube roots. Don't know why that's missing. Page 6, under summary and rationale, it says, not all numbers have an exact value on a number line. I think that needs a little clarification, or it should be deleted. I mean, I don't know why that sentence is in there or what it's meant by. What's the purpose of having that sentence there?
It's not that irrational language. Numbers that don't have an exact value on a number line, and that you have to do it in students to that.
Yeah, I think it should be explained a little bit. vocabulary, rational number, irrational number, natural number, whole number, cube root. This is science grade 6. Can you explain to me what is a SWVAT?
Students will be able to. It's just an acronym. They just speak.
Okay. Okay, 7th grade science, they added some experiments and a trip to Plainsboro Preserve. They also talk about genetics, but they don't mention Gregor Mendel or Charles Darwin. Just wondering why those people are not mentioned. Science grade 8. Okay, here's something that confused me. There's an extra word is under task, taking the sun. Here's a statement that confused me. Because light can travel through space, it cannot be a matter wave like sound or water waves. Don't sound waves also travel through space? I don't understand that. I think that's a mistake.
No, the space is a vacuum. Sound doesn't travel through vacuum.
Sound doesn't travel through
The vacuum of space.
vacuum. of space.
Make a noise on the
You need
moon,
air.
he wants to hear it.
Yeah.
Well,
That's right. You need air, yeah.
Am I right? Okay.
You know, when I went to school, we only had 103 elements.
I'm happy to see that in honors biology, they describe the RNA synthesis and RNA processing. That's good. Chemistry. In chemistry, they are writing balanced chemical equations and explain the correlation to the law of conservation of matter, and use mathematics and computational thinking to apply the mole concept in calculations. That's excellent. Very happy to see that. On the honors chemistry, it says in an explanation on page 5, emphasis is on assessing students' use of mathematical thinking and not on memorization and rote application of problem-solving techniques. That's mentioned many times throughout these curriculums. I don't know why that keeps being repeated over and over again. On page 6, there's a missing word under ability objectives. Down towards the bottom, use mathematics and computational thinking to support. Okay, there's a missing 2. Under resources, it says core text, core text. That's just a typo. On page 12, there's a missing word under reasoning at the bottom. It says the specific nuclear chemistry processes that as a result. Should be that occur as a result. And there's a word missing on page 15 under ability objectives. Students analyze and interpret data from the periodic table to construct explanations of the patterns of behavior. There's no other. Okay, genetics. This is a half-year course, I think. It doesn't mention Gregor Mendel or Charles Darwin. It doesn't mention RNA. It doesn't mention all the diseases you can get if you're missing a chromosome and things like that. It seems like, to me, genetics is an endlessly fascinating subject that would be really exciting to learn about. But this curriculum seems to be kind of torn from the headlines type stuff, and I think maybe you should even change the name of the class, because they're not really learning about genetics. They're learning about careers in genetics or controversies about what's going on with DNA testing and things like that, but they're not actually learning about genetics. also has something called an assessment boundary. Assessment does not include the phases of meiosis or the biochemical mechanism of specific steps in the process, which to me means it's not really genetic scores. And I mean, there's so many fascinating things you can discuss in that subject. The thing that was in the old curriculum for genetics, it's not in the new curriculum, is humans share a common ancestor and their evolutionary journey can be traced using genetics. You can utilize ancestry sources to develop a model tracing families of lines back to Africa and aggregate models on a class scale, utilizing a person in the classroom to get a world view. That's missing. Physics. Physics looks great. All punctuation is perfect. Same thing with physics honors. Same thing with astronomy. And forensic science. There are some missing periods on page 10. Other than that, great. Human anatomy. Anatomy, missing periods on under Unit 11 body system. Chinese curriculum, all foreign language curriculums look really good. 6th grade social studies, there is a word missing on the third page, I guess third, 4th page. Unit 1, Beginnings of Human Society. Under historical thinking skills, it says students will also develop chronological thinking skills to recognize time and chronology. Okay. Job skills. Under instructional focus, it says students will know and be able to prepare and ask appropriate answers to typical interview questions. I think that's wrong. I don't know how you can prepare and ask appropriate answers. I think that's a mistake, and it should just say prepare appropriate answers. Transition math. On page 3, objectives, student will know. Percent mean out of 100 should be percent means. Percent means out of 100. On ESL 2 bio, I don't know what page this is. It says cite evidence that cells exist within in the narrow range. It should be just within. There's an extra word in there. Theater arts, 9 to 12. This looks good. There are a couple of periods missing at the bottom of unit 3. Art foundation, 9 to 12. Unit 0. Under summary and rationale, 3rd paragraph, it says they will become more familiar with technology. I think it should be they will use and become more familiar. IRLA 8. It says on page 19, teach your students a few structural choice and how to use these to strengthen their argument and guide the reader will crucial. I believe that's not a sentence, but it's from the English curriculum. Job skills, they're missing periods all over the place. Library grade 2. It's library grade 2, yet in the 2nd paragraph under summary and rationale it says practice throughout 3rd grade. Should be 2nd grade. Page 11, library grade 2, it says students will able to. Should be students will be able to. Elementary guidance. Okay. So this is elementary guidance, and it says under instructional focus for academic development unit, it says identify the challenge, students will identify the challenges of elementary school and where to go for help. Identify the academic, social, and personal changes that occur during middle school. These are elementary kids. Why are they learning about all these changes in middle school? I think that's a mistake. Okay, on page 17, it says this unit will expose students to strategies for managing stress. Hallelujah. It's also missing a period at the end of that statement and periods under students' will. I'd like to know what ones. Will every student in the district be taught these things? I mean, my impression is that most of the guidance curriculum is taught in small groups or one-on-one. And would this be something taught to all students in big groups? And what exactly are they going to be and when will they be learning it? Also, I'm wondering, would the guidance people, or who is it that would be thinking about whether elementary kids need a morning recess? Would that come under guidance, or who is working on that? So I think elementary kids need a morning recess. So when it says method of delivery, developmentally appropriate lessons, when and how often are these things going to be taught? And, is every student going to be taught these stress-related techniques? And in middle school, middle school guidance. On page 12, under instructional focus, it says, unit essential questions. How do you interest in abilities with academic expectations? Again, not a sentence. I think it should say, how do you balance interest and abilities with academic expectations? On page 15, it says, students will learn when stress has gotten to a point where they need to seek out resources to cope and identify positive coping strategies. What are those strategies? When are they going to be taught these strategies? How often? I'd like a lot more detail about that. And a plan for teaching that in every grade to every kid. High school guidance. This is page 7. Third line, how does the student's individual skills? It should be how do the student's individual skills. Objective, second line. They have diverse needs, backgrounds, and approaches, and will learn to plan. There's a period, 2 periods at the end of that page. On page 14, as a result, under objective, as a result, tools and structures will be integrated to enable each individual students, should be student. On page 22, under evidence of learning, questions. What consequences has your behaviors had? That's a terrible sentence. It should be, what consequences have your behaviors had? Okay, so the guidance, I was really hoping to see yoga, breathing exercises, meditation, mindfulness, all these things in every single guidance curriculum. And I'm really disappointed it's not there.
Any other comments?
Question. So Carol has mentioned that some things are no longer mentioned in the curriculum that might have been mentioned in the past. Does that mean they are no longer being taught, or just that they are not mentioned in the curriculum document anymore?
Good question. Often it means that it's no longer just not mentioned in the curriculum document, not that it's not taught. It's usually as a result of alignment standards, or alignment whether it's national and or state, through some kind of scope and sequence. I see our content supervisors in the audience shaking their head. So
I would also add that references to specific books at the high school, one of the areas that I know the teachers worked very diligently on was not always just kind of like we've done in the middle school, focusing on one text per unit, but actually offering students choice. There's been a great deal of work in finding a whole variety of resources, so therefore just naming one book in a unit or one specific text without leaving it open to a whole variety of text, it was a whole area of concentration, which is why in some cases maybe a text reference is no longer there, because we're now looking at variety.
Okay, so that means the authors that are no longer mentioned, that's why they're not mentioned, not because we don't teach those authors or include those authors anymore.
Authors may be a choice, but if another student chose another author to access a certain genre, that would be acceptable as well. And we've increased those choices, but they become too numbered, kind of like the middle school curriculum. You wouldn't list all of them anymore because there's a whole variety that we're offering.
How are these curriculum documents used by faculty?
They're used on a regular basis for the planning of their units of study. So, they've also helped design them, but you now have a unit of study, you now have use a unit, and now how do you develop your daily plan out of that? So that unit may have X number of days that you would predict that you're going to carry that out within, also depending on your students, how you assess your students, what you know about your students, and then how do you design your daily lessons around that, and then how do you monitor students through those daily lessons through both formative and summative assessments. So it's a guide for teachers, but then there's that individuality that teachers bring to their own practice in the classroom.
I also noticed that in the previous curriculums, there was something called Language Arts 1 and 2 Grammar and Language Arts 3 and 4 Grammar, and they're not in the new curriculum. So I was wondering, are you still going to continue to use these, or how is that going to work?
That I couldn't answer right now without that information.
Okay.
As the curriculum committee member, I have to admit I didn't read all the before and after curriculum documents. I think my focus is more on procedures and processes in place, like what the teachers and what subject content are doing what. At the same time, I do appreciate and admire Mrs. Hurt's effort to read through pretty much all the all the ones that she had comments on. So I guess the question is, maybe we can take into her some of the obvious, like English or something, like grammar corrections and such, into the consideration. And so I don't know how we would move forward.
I'm gonna ask that if anybody finds any typos or missing words that looks like you haven't documented, even we'll send them over to Martin, and it'll be cleaned up as it gets published. Any other questions?
Okay,
So
this is motions, just a reminder, this is motions 1 through 10 in the curriculum section of the agenda.
Right.
We do have a motion and a second, so going forward, roll call vote. Ms. Hertz?
Okay, I'm going to vote yes on some and no on some.
That's fine, just,
Okay.
I might have to ask you to repeat out.
All right, I'm voting yes on the 5 new ones, 1 through 5. And
Okay,
voting-
so just,
Should we?
so that would be 2A through E, right?
Correct.
Okay.
I don't, yes, is that, yes, 2 A through B, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Including
And
language.
voting yes on A through F of number 3.
A.
And then I'm voting no on band, even though I want to vote yes, but I want them to put peer training back.
That's G through J.
That's right. And then I'm voting yes. Okay.
Okay.
Then I'm voting yes on K, L, and M.
Okay.
And N.
N is yes?
N is yes.
Okay.
O is yes.
Okay.
P is yes.
Okay.
And I'm voting no on Q, R, S, and T.
Q, R, S, T is no.
Right. U is yes.
Okay.
V is no. And then W, X, Y, Z are all yes.
Okay.
Okay, and then AA and BB and CC are all yes.
Okay.
DD is no.
Okay.
And then everything else is yes except for the three, except for X, X, Y, Y, and ZZ.
Okay, so EE through WW is yes.
Yes.
X, X, Y, Y, ZZ is no.
Correct.
Okay. That's for number 2. And I
Yeah.
apologize, I'm going to have to ask, there are the other resolutions and curriculum items 1, 3 through 10. 3 through, excuse me.
1.
6 I want to discuss more, so we're ready to go.
Well, let's recall the vote.
The rest of them, everybody does not, except for 6.
Okay, so you're voting no for now on 6, pending another discussion. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to read that back just to make sure I got it.
Okay.
Okay, so 1 was a yes. 2, A through E is yes. 3, A.
No, C, D. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong place. Okay, 1 over here was, yes, 1 was yes, 2 is yes, yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
3, A through F, yes. G through J, no.
Right.
K through P, yes. Q through T, no. Y, yes. V, no. W through C, yes. D, no.
Correct.
E to WW, yes. X, X to ZZ, no. And then yes on the rest with the exception of 6.
Yes.
Got it. Ms. Sutton.
Yes.
Ms. Julian.
Yes.
Ms. Cruz.
Yes.
Mr. YZ Zhang.
Yes, without the minor corrections included.
Mr. Taylor Zong.
Yes.
Ms. Cage.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Ms. Cage, yes, I'm sorry. Mr. Chen.
Yes.
Mr. Flores.
Yes.
All motions passed.
All right. Finance.
I want to talk about number 6. We talk about the reading recovery professional development.
Okay. Understand the way the process goes. I'll let you talk about this time, but will you call for a motion of the uplift? We call for a motion on the items,
Right.
and I ask for a discussion of the items. We discuss all the items that are on that
So we
motion.
should have discussed.
So when I said, were there any more questions,
Okay.
you should have said, yes, I have one on 6.
Right.
But we voted on 6 and passed it. If you want to make a statement, you know, say what you want to say,
Okay.
but
I would like to make a statement. I'm reading this excellent book, which I highly recommend to everyone. It's called Language at the Speed of Sight, and it's by Mark Seidenberg. He's a professor at Wisconsin, Madison. And in this book, he summarizes all the latest research on the brain and how children and people learn to read, and dyslexia, and everything else. He's done further research on this. It's a very interesting book. I really recommend it to everyone. He in this book explains why reading recovery is a terrible, terrible thing. The point is that it's based on whole language, which has been proven over and over again to be a very bad way to teach kids to learn. And what happens is if kids are having trouble learning to read, and then they're giving reading recovery, it's like doubling down on what was causing the problems in the first place, which is whole language. So it's a huge mistake. There's a lot of research on this. And here's 30 international reading researchers expressed concerns about the continued use of reading recovery. These experts urged policymakers, educational leaders, researchers, and federal research organizations to acknowledge the weaknesses of reading recovery. They concluded reading recovery leaves too many students behind. Reading recovery is a meaning-based program rooted in whole language ideology created by Marie Claire of New Zealand and brought to the U.S. in the 1980s. It does not focus on phonemic awareness or phonics. That's the key point about it. It does not use phonics. Phonics is the way you have to learn to read. It doesn't use phonics at all, which are more often the deficit skills of struggling first graders. So this is exactly the problem. They need the phonics and they're not getting it with whole language. So then to give them more whole language is just making the problem worse. It's the most expensive type of intervention because it's one-to-one and the teacher training is expensive. More children would be served at a lower cost with a variety of intervention programs. WWP could be doing better for taxpayers while not harming children. There are no studies that indicate reading recovery has a lasting effect on literary achievement. And even their own reporting shows that only 30% of students go on to need further reading intervention. Reading achievement by first graders is highly variable. And critics of reading recovery believe that it's not what reading recovery does, but rather it's the extra time, 30 minutes a day, focused on reading that creates any success the program has. It's the one-on-one delivery making the difference. It's not the content of the program. This could be done with any intervention. So, and this goes on and on. There's all sorts of links, and this book explains it much better than I can. I encourage you all to read it. But basically, reading recovery is the worst thing you can do for a kid who's struggling with reading. So I absolutely vote against that.
All right. Now we're going to go to the finance agenda. All right, can I have a motion on items 1 to 14? And we're going to do 15 separately. Finance. Rachel and Louisa. Any questions or discussion on items 1 to 14? Ms. Ho?
Yes.
Ms. Juliana?
Yes.
Ms. Crew?
Yes.
Mr. Weisey Zhang?
Yes.
Mr. Taylor Zong?
Yes.
Mr. Chang?
Yes.
Ms. Hertz?
Yes.
Ms. Cage?
Yes.
Mr. Flores?
Yes.
Motion is carried.
All right, now I need a motion on item 15. I'm going to remind some board members that they need to abstain on it. Item 15, motion is Isaac and Rachel. Any discussion on that?
Ms. Juliana?
Yes.
Ms. Crew?
Abstain.
Mr. Weisey Zhang?
Yes.
Mr. Taylor Zong?
You have to abstain.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Let me see.
No, Taylor, if
Why is he
you're,
meant to say abstain?
Okay.
no, if you're going, you have to
You
abstain.
have to abstain because you're going.
No, but you're not in, no, you're fine, you're not in that agenda.
You can vote yes.
You can vote yes, too.
Yes.
Okay, so,
Why is it?
I understand, okay.
Why is it?
Taylor.
Mr. Taylor's on.
Yes.
Mr. Chen.
Yes.
Ms. Hertz. Ms. Ho.
Abstain.
Ms. Cage.
Abstain.
Mr. Flores.
Yes.
Okay, so I have 5 yes, 4 abstentions, motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Personnel. I have a motion on items 1 and 2, plus we have a pink and a blue addenda. We have a pink and blue addenda. Any questions on the personnel?
I'm sorry, first, is there a motion?
Oh, I see here. Dana and Rachel.
Okay.
Any questions?
Ms. Crew.
Yes.
Mr. Y.Z. Zhang.
Yes.
Mr. Taylor John.
Yes.
Mr. Chen. Ms. Hertz. Ms. Ho.
Yes.
Ms. Julianne.
Yes.
Ms. Cage.
Yes.
Mr. Flores.
Yes.
All motions carried.
I'm going to announce her retirement. We just learned about it a few hours ago. Mr. Russell Schumacher, Special Assistant for Labor Relations, is going to be retiring at the end of this year after 18 years with the district. It's a little bit of a surprise. He's going to be missed. I know that we've had a lot of late negotiation nights with him, and I'll have more to say when he's around in the meeting to hear it. Okay, approval of the minutes. Can I have a motion for YZ and Taylor? Any comments on the minutes? Those who approve say aye. Aye. Opposed? Any liaison reports? Any new business? That brings us to the second opportunity for public comment. 15 minutes is provided at the end of the meeting for public comments. All statements should be addressed to the presiding officer. Again, it says here is 15 minutes long. Anyone else?
Captain Foley, 29 Hawthorne Drive in West Windsor. About 15 years ago, I remember talking to a board member. I had been attending board meetings, and I told her it looked like the board members were just rubber stamping whatever was on the agenda. And this board member explained to me, and other board members, and since then have explained to me that the homework is done ahead of time, that they're given what is called apparently a pony on the Friday before the meeting, where they get all of the information ahead of time. And that if there are questions or things to be hammered out, that typically that's the collegial thing to do, to hammer that out ahead of time to make these proceedings efficient. I second what YZ mentioned earlier. I really appreciate the thoroughness of Ms. Hertz. I think that the district benefits from all kind of comments, and especially editing documents that are going to be part of the permanent record. But I might recommend that perhaps you do the list ahead of time and distribute it so the questions that you had could be answered, and that these punctuation issues could be addressed, and your list of concerns perhaps could be distributed to the people in the audience. I'm given a 3-minute time limit, and I think that that's out of respect for everybody who's here, and respect for the time of the board members who are volunteering their evening to do this. And I just felt like it was a colossal waste of time to spend that much time talking about periods and comments and those issues. I think the point could have been made that we need to be more careful in editing these documents as we're putting them forth to the public. No disrespect to Ms. Hertz, but I just would ask that the board impose a time limit on questions that the board members. You've had all weekend, and you've had Monday and all day today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else?
My name is Bruce Shelley, and I'm the president of the Teachers Association. I will stick to my prepared notes. First, Sherry, I promise not to quote you. Okay, about administrators.
It's on tape.
I will not quote her. I will not quote her. We're all friends. We're all friends. First, to the board members, I'd like to wish you a happy new school year. To Carol and to Dana and to Isaac and Louisa and Rachel and Taylor and Tony and YZ, thank you for your service. Thank you. It's been a good start to the school year. If you hadn't had the opportunity to watch the convocation video, I urge you to do that. Many teachers were very, very moved and touched by the video. It's a very well done job administration. The recent weather events have impacted us all, and I'm proud that the Teacher Advisory Committee on Volunteerism has met and shared ideas on how we can help our students and ourselves to reach out to those in need. Dave mentioned it earlier, it is something built in the contract. We hope that we all can work under the WWP Cares umbrella in that. The teachers will also be helping to raise funds. Our own WWPA Cares decided to reprise our Sandy Costa dinner. So we're hoping on the October 6th, Friday, High School North, that we will have a pasta dinner where the teachers are the servers and the cleaner-uppers, and here's the chance for the children to tell teachers what to do. So that would be good. So look for more information on that. And the final comment, quote, "You aspire to great things, begin with little ones," end quote. This quote by Augustus of Hippo summarized my feelings tonight. And it's also a quote that WWPA uses tonight in relationship to the announcement of the retirement of Russ Schumacher after 19 years. I know he's not here tonight, but I feel it's important that we go on the record. Russ was now out leading the band. Russ was not the one out there making speeches. Mr. Schumacher was the man behind the scenes, working on what many people would consider trivial things. We talked about many things over these years, whether it's 2 a.m. in the morning or 4 a.m. in the morning. But none of those trivial things can be considered little. All his work has had a direct impact on the lives of teachers. His work behind the scenes has had a direct impact on the lives of our students. Throughout all of his work, he approached his responsibilities with caution, care, and most importantly, heart. His 19 years here have contributed to make us who we are and what we are today. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
You can shut that thing like that.
Veronica Nino, 31 Ralston Drive. First and foremost, I wanted to say that I am product of a dual immersion language program. I was raised English and Spanish, and I did all my subjects in English, all my subjects in Spanish. I went to a British school, so the European system was the one that I used, or the school that I went to used. And we had vocabulary. We were taught synonyms, antonyms. We had grammar. We had dictation, seen dictation, unseen dictation. Copy the words 3 and 4 times to make sure that we knew how to spell it. So, and then we had to use it in a sentence. So therefore, when they say, well, it's important just to use it in context, I have to, in a way, disagree, because when you write, you need to have 3 or 4 different ways of saying the same thing, and it has to be productive, and it has to be concise. On another note, I think that Ms. Hertz was elected by the community. She's doing her job, what the community actually asked her to do. She has a fiduciary responsibility, and she is being very thorough, and maybe some of the residents are not aware that there are certain laws that do not allow for the entire BOE to meet previously, or just a group of members of the DOE to meet on their own. So what Ms. Hurd is doing is basically being extremely thorough and going item by item. The word impose, I think it's a little too harsh, coming from a resident when all of the other people are very happy with Ms. Hurd's work. Thank you so much for your job, Ms. Hurd.
Thank you. Anyone else? Can I have a motion to? Debbie.
Sorry. I just got here, I'm sorry, I had something with my son earlier today. But I wanted to say something, knowing that Russ is retiring, I just wanted to say that it's an invaluable position that he holds because we're such a large district, and he has the ability to do the kinds of work that make our work easier, probably for each other, from both sides of the district. And so the position is important. But what I really want to talk about is a person, because Russ has a certain way of understanding things deeply, yet explaining them plainly, and taking into consideration the people. Because really this is a people job. Whether it's me with the little people in reading recovery, or whether it's grown-ups working with each other, or high school students who are working in clubs, we're all a people job. And he really has an exceptional ability of getting to the people part of it. And I think he stretched himself, and what I said to him directly, excuse me, was he really became very knowledgeable about our jobs by doing our jobs too. So he would come and watch kids play on the sports field, or he would go on a field trip with a club, or he would come and just sit in the back of my classroom if we were debating when I taught 8th grade. So he wanted to understand, and that generosity of his time really endeared him to, I think, everybody, and it made him particularly good at the position. So we are definitely going to miss that person I talked about a little bit earlier, and I'm sorry I didn't get to hear what he said, but hopefully we're echoing each other in a way. But I just thought we can't let this go by where we know that he is going to resign, because not only is his position important, but he really, and his sincerity and his knowledge is beyond compare, really. So I just want to put that on the record, that we really, the association counts on him, and we've grown to love him. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, can I have a motion to adjourn? Isaac and Rachel. Those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you all for coming out.